I'm Jason Wright, 24, and I've spent my entire life in my brother Marcus's shadow. 3 weeks ago, at our annual family reunion, Marcus shoved me into the lake and laughed while I gasped for air with my damaged lungs. "Don't be so dramatic," he smirked as our parents watched silently. I didn't argue or fight back. I simply smiled. 2 weeks later, his $50,000 college fund disappeared into accounts he'll never find, and I vanished from their lives. Before I tell you what happened, drop a comment about where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family. Growing up in suburban Boston with my older brother Marcus was like living in constant eclipse. 3 years older, 3 inches taller, and infinitely more important in our parents' eyes. Our family home was a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a spacious yard, but somehow, I always felt confined, trapped in the narrow space Marcus's shadow allowed me. I first noticed the difference in how we were treated during our birthdays. When Marcus turned 10, our parents threw him an extravaganza that the neighborhood talked about for months. They rented a small carnival, complete with rides and cotton candy machines. There were personalized t-shirts for every guest, professional entertainers, and a 3-tier cake with sparklers. The local newspaper even covered it as a community event. When my 10th birthday arrived 3 years later, I received a small gathering in our backyard with pizza and a store-bought cake. My mother Nancy said, "We don't need to go overboard for every birthday, Jason. You understand that, right? You've always been our practical one." I nodded and smiled while swallowing disappointment that tasted sharper than the cheap frosting. My father Richard and mother Nancy operated with 2 distinct sets of standards for their sons. When Marcus brought home C's and D's, they would say things like, "School isn't everyone's strength," or, "You're just too creative for traditional education." When I brought home straight A's, the response was typically, "That's what we expect from you," or sometimes nothing at all. The pattern of Marcus's deliberate cruelty began early. When I was 8, we were roughhousing in the backyard. At least that's how Marcus described it to the emergency room doctor. What actually happened was Marcus twisted my arm behind my back until something snapped because I had used his video game controller. I screamed in pain as my radius bone broke, and Marcus immediately launched into tears, claiming it was an accident. My parents comforted him, while the doctor set my cast. "Boys will be boys," my father said on the drive home, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "But you need to be more careful with your little brother. He's not as sturdy as you." In 6th grade, I spent weeks working on a science fair project about renewable energy sources. I had built a working model of a wind turbine that could power a small LED display. The night before the fair, I came downstairs to find Marcus and his friends using my turbine blades as ninja stars, throwing them against the wall. The project was destroyed. "It was just sitting there," Marcus explained to our parents. "How was I supposed to know it was important? You should have put it somewhere safer," my mother told me as I tried not to cry. I stayed up all night trying to rebuild it, but the damage was too extensive. My teacher gave me an extension, but the judges had already selected the winners by then. Later, I learned from my science teacher that my project would likely have won first place. During my freshman year of high school, our family computer crashed the night before a major assignment was due. Marcus was home from college for the weekend and claimed he could fix it. After several hours, he emerged triumphant, having recovered all the files. My parents praised him endlessly for his technical genius. What they didn't know was that I had walked him through every step via text message from my bedroom. When I mentioned this fact at breakfast, my father Richard laughed and said, "Don't be jealous, Jason. Everyone has different talents." Their dismissal of my achievements became so predictable that I stopped sharing them. When I scored perfect 1600 on my SATs, my mother's response was, "That's expected of you." When I won the regional debate championship, beating seniors though I was only a sophomore, my father simply asked, "Is there a scholarship with that?" The most telling moment came when multiple universities sent me scholarship offers during my junior year. Most kids' parents would have been thrilled at the financial relief. Mine seemed almost disappointed. Well, I guess we won't need to contribute much then, my father said, reviewing the offers. I didn't understand the significance of this comment until much later. To survive in this environment, I developed specific mechanisms. I became nearly invisible at family gatherings, finding quiet corners to read or helping in the kitchen where adults would at least appreciate the extra hands. I threw myself into academics not just for achievement but for escape. The library became my sanctuary. When I turned 16, I got a part-time job at Cornerstone Books, a local independent bookstore. The owner, Harold Wilson, became more of a father figure to me than my actual father ever was. "You've got an old soul, Jason," Harold would tell me as we unpacked news shipments. "And a sharp mind. Don't let anyone dim that light." The swimming incident happened when I was 12. During a family vacation at Lake Winnipesaukee, Marcus, then 15, dared me to swim across a section of the lake during an approaching thunderstorm. "Unless you're too much of a baby," he taunted in front of our cousins. I was halfway across when the storm hit full force. The waves grew larger, rain pelted down, and my arms began to tire. I remember panicking, swallowing water, and the terrifying sensation of my lungs filling with liquid instead of air. A nearby boater spotted me and pulled me out. I spent 5 days in the hospital with severe pneumonia. The infection damaged my lungs permanently, leaving me with reduced capacity and susceptibility to respiratory issues. During my recovery, my parents visited briefly each day, usually discussing how this unfortunate incident was disrupting their vacation plans. "What were you thinking, swimming during a storm?" my mother asked repeatedly. "You're supposed to be the sensible one." Not once did they question why Marcus had dared me, why he hadn't warned me to come back when the storm approached, or why he had laughed when I was pulled from the water barely conscious. That incident created both physical and emotional scars that would factor significantly into what happened at the lake reunion years later. My high school years passed in stark contrast to Marcus's college experience. While I maintained a perfect GPA despite working 30 hours a week at the bookstore, Marcus struggled to keep his head above water at State. His Facebook posts showed endless parties, new clothes, and weekend trips, while his academic performance hovered around a 2.0 GPA. During his sophomore year, Marcus was caught cheating on a final exam. My parents drove 4 hours to meet with the dean, pleading for leniency. "He's just finding his way," my father insisted. "Everyone makes mistakes." Marcus received academic probation instead of expulsion. 6 months later, it happened again. This time, my parents hired an expensive lawyer to argue that Marcus's learning differences hadn't been properly accommodated. They never specified what these differences were, probably because they didn't exist. Once again, Marcus received what the university called his final second chance. Meanwhile, my parents hired costly tutors for Marcus and made endless excuses for his behavior. "College is more challenging for some people," my mother explained when I asked why they were spending so much on Marcus's education when he clearly wasn't taking it seriously. The financial discrepancies between how my parents treated us became glaringly obvious during tax season my junior year. I was helping my father organize his receipts, another thankless task that fell to me, when I discovered statements for Marcus's dedicated college fund. The account held just over $50,000, carefully accumulated since his birth for his education. Curious, I searched for my equivalent fund but found nothing. Later that week, I accidentally found more statements while looking for a stapler in my father's home office. The papers confirmed what I suspected. There was no college fund for me. Despite my academic promise, my parents had saved nothing for my education. My financial independence became my focus. I increased my hours at Cornerstone Books while maintaining my 4.0 GPA. I opened my own bank account without my parents' knowledge, with Harold as my adult cosigner until I turned 18. I saved every dollar possible, living with minimal expenses and learning financial management skills from Harold, who had previously worked in banking before following his passion for books. "Knowledge is power, Jason," Harold told me as he explained investment basics. But knowing how money works is freedom. During my senior year, I finally confronted my parents about the unequal treatment. We were sitting at the dinner table when college acceptance letters began arriving. Despite my exceptional academic record, the financial reality was bleak. "I've been accepted to 7 universities, including 2 Ivies," I said, placing the letters on the table. "But I'll need financial help to attend any of them." My mother barely looked up from her plate. "We've always been clear that you need scholarships, Jason. Marcus has a $50,000 college fund," I said quietly. "Does a fund like that exist for me?" The silence that followed confirmed what I already knew. "Your brother needs more help than you," my mother finally said. "You've always been self-sufficient." "So I'm being punished for being responsible?" I asked. My father's face reddened with anger. "This family has sacrificed plenty for your activities and needs. You're not entitled to compare what we've done for each of you. Are you jealous of your brother? Is that what this is about? I just want to understand if I should expect any financial support for college," I persisted. "You have 2 choices," my father said coldly. "Accept your place in this family or make things difficult for everyone. Which will it be?" I chose a third option, emotional withdrawal. I built mental barriers against my family's toxicity and focused entirely on my escape plan. The only relative who seemed to recognize the unfairness was my Aunt Diane, my father's sister, who had witnessed the disparity for years. "This isn't right, Richard," I overheard her telling my father during a holiday gathering. "You're going to lose Jason if you keep this up." "Mind your business, Diane," my father responded. "We know our sons." When graduation arrived, my options were limited despite acceptance letters from prestigious universities. My parents refused to complete financial aid forms properly, claiming their income was private information and that I should be able to manage on academic scholarships alone. Without proper parental financial information, many aid opportunities were closed to me. I settled for the local state college while continuing to live at home to save money. Each day in that house felt like slowly drowning, but I focused on my goal, independence. The annual Wilson family reunion at Lake Winnipesaukee was a tradition I had dreaded for years. This particular summer, with tensions already high in our household, I approached the gathering with carefully prepared emotional armor. Over 40 extended family members would be present, most of whom accepted the carefully crafted image my parents presented of our perfect family. Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert were the only ones who seemed to see through the facade. They had witnessed enough interactions over the years to understand the dynamic, though they rarely intervened directly. Still, their knowing glances and occasional supportive comments helped me feel slightly less crazy. I packed my inhaler and respiratory medication, knowing the combination of lake humidity, campfire smoke, and family stress could trigger breathing problems. The damage from the childhood swimming incident had never fully healed, leaving me with diminished lung capacity that became problematic under physical or emotional stress. The reunion began like all others, with Marcus as the center of attention. He arrived 3 hours late in a brand new Audi that our parents had helped him finance. Translation: they were making the payments. He loudly greeted everyone, distributing hugs and backslaps with the confidence of someone who's always been told they're special. "The golden boy has arrived," Uncle Thomas announced as Marcus made his entrance. "Now the party can really start." Marcus immediately launched into stories about his college adventures, strategically edited to omit his academic probations and failed classes. Our relatives laughed at his tales of parties and pranks, while my parents beamed with pride at their sociable, charismatic son. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus's drinking increased steadily. He moved from beer to bourbon, becoming louder and more physically intrusive with each hour. He repeatedly interrupted my conversations with relatives, throwing his arm around my shoulders and saying things like, "Don't believe a word this Ned says," or, "Jason's just jealous, he doesn't know how to have fun." I spent most of the day helping my younger cousins with swimming lessons in the shallow part of the lake. 8-year-old twins Emily and Ethan had asked me specifically to teach them, remembering how I had patiently helped them learn to ride bikes the previous summer. Working with the kids provided a perfect excuse to avoid the adult gathering where Marcus held court. "You're really good with them," Aunt Diane commented as she brought towels down to the dock. "They adore you." "They're great kids," I replied, helping Ethan adjust his arm position for a better stroke. "And they actually listen, which is refreshing." From the corner of my eye, I noticed Marcus watching us from the patio. The children's laughter and their obvious preference for my company seemed to irritate him. After another shot of bourbon, he made his way down to the dock, swagger in his step. "Look at the family babysitter," he announced loudly enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Always hiding with the kids instead of hanging with the adults. Afraid you can't keep up with real conversation, Jason?" "We're in the middle of swimming lessons," I said calmly. "Maybe join us later?" "Emily, Ethan, go get some ice cream," Marcus told the twins. "The adults are serving it now." The children looked at me uncertainly. "Go ahead," I said with a smile. "We'll continue later." As the kids ran toward the house, I began collecting the pool noodles and water toys, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. I knew from experience that engaging would only escalate the situation. My plan was simple. Clean up, walk away, and find another quiet activity until dinner. "Always the responsible one," Marcus slurred, stepping closer on the wooden dock. "Must be exhausting being so perfect all the time." "I'm just helping out," I replied, still not looking at him as I stacked the swim boards. "You know what your problem is?" Marcus continued, his voice getting louder. "You think you're better than everyone. With your grades and your responsibility and your quiet judgment." I finally stood up, toys in hand, and attempted to walk past him. "I need to return these to the boathouse." What happened next occurred so quickly I had no time to react. As I moved past him, Marcus's arm shot out, his palm connecting firmly with my chest in a violent shove. The force of it sent me stumbling backward off the dock. I dropped the armful of toys as I fell, arms windmilling uselessly. The shock of cold water was instantaneous. I plunged below the surface, fully clothed, in the deep section of the lake. My shoes and jeans immediately became weights pulling me down. When I surfaced, gasping, water entered my lungs with my first desperate breath, triggering an immediate spasm in my damaged respiratory system. I began coughing violently, struggling to keep my head above water while my lungs seized. Through the water in my eyes, I could see Marcus on the dock, doubled over with laughter. Several family members had now gathered, watching the scene unfold. "Don't be so dramatic," Marcus called out between laughs. "It's just water." The familiar tightness in my chest intensified as I struggled toward the ladder at the dock's end. Each movement felt like swimming through concrete as my waterlogged clothes dragged me down. My breathing became a series of wheezing gasps that brought more water than air. From the deck above, I could see my parents watching impassively. They made no move to help or reprimand Marcus. Their expressions suggested mild annoyance at the disruption to the gathering, not concern for their drowning son. Aunt Diane was the first to react, rushing down from the deck. "Jason! Are you okay?" Uncle Robert appeared at the ladder, extending his hand to help me climb out. My lungs burned as I continued coughing, each breath a struggle against the constriction in my chest. Water streamed from my clothes as I sat on the dock, fighting to regulate my breathing. "It was just a joke," Marcus announced to the gathering crowd. "Look at him milking it for attention." Through my respiratory distress, I heard scattered laughter. My father placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, not in reprimand but in what appeared to be solidarity. My mother shook her head slightly, lips tight with what looked like embarrassment, not at Marcus's behavior, but at my overreaction. "Don't be so dramatic," Marcus repeated, smirking as he took another swig from his drink. "The water's not even cold." I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Between the struggle for breath and the crushing weight of this final, public humiliation, words failed me. I simply nodded at Uncle Robert's concerned face, and made my way shakily to my feet. "I'll go change," I managed between wheezes, walking with as much dignity as possible past the onlookers. In the bathroom of my parents' lake house, I locked the door and sat on the closed toilet lid, using my inhaler and focusing on slowing my breathing. The attack gradually subsided, leaving me exhausted and hollow. Through the thin walls, I could hear conversation resuming on the deck. My mother's voice drifted clearly. "He's always been sensitive. Even as a baby." When I emerged in dry clothes 30 minutes later, dinner was in full swing. Marcus sat at the center of the main table, regaling everyone with another college story. Several male relatives patted his shoulder as they passed, some making joking references to my swimming lesson. I took a plate and sat at the far end of the second table, beside Aunt Diane. "Are you really okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. But I wasn't fine. Something fundamental had shifted. As I picked at my food, I listened to my parents discussing Marcus's tuition needs for the coming semester. Apparently, his summer classes would require an additional withdrawal from the special college fund. That night, lying in bed in the lake house's small guest room, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. The passive, accommodating Jason who accepted his role as family doormat died the moment Marcus pushed him into that lake. In his place, a new version emerged, one who understood that nothing would ever change unless he forced it to. The 2 weeks following the lake incident were transformative. While outwardly I maintained my usual quiet routine, internally I was methodically assembling the pieces of what would become my liberation. My first step was gathering information. The following weekend, my parents attended their friend's anniversary dinner, leaving the house empty for 6 hours. I used this time to thoroughly search my father's home office. Years of being the responsible one meant I knew where every important document was kept, including financial records. I photographed bank statements, account numbers, and investment portfolios with my phone. In the back of my father's filing cabinet, I discovered a folder containing notices of Marcus's academic probation, physical evidence of the failure my parents had been hiding and enabling for years. Most tellingly, I found receipts for expenses paid from Marcus's college fund that had nothing to do with education. Spring break trips to Cancun, the down payment on his new Audi, monthly allowances for living expenses that exceeded reasonable amounts. These transactions created a clear pattern of misuse of funds designated for educational purposes. My business law courses at the State College provided the foundation for the next phase of my research. I met with Mrs. Peterson, my academic advisor, under the pretense of discussing financial independence for tax purposes. "I'm trying to understand how to legally separate my finances from my parents," I explained. "For FAFSA and scholarship applications. That's complicated before you're 24, she warned, but provided valuable resources on financial structures and legal independence. Through careful study, I discovered something critical. 2 years earlier, when my parents had taken a 3-week anniversary trip to Europe, they had signed a limited power of attorney allowing me to manage their accounts and pay household bills in their absence. They had chosen me over Marcus because, in my mother's words, "Jason is the only one we trust with money." A quick check confirmed what I suspected. They had never filed paperwork to revoke this authorization. Legally, I still had access to all accounts listed in the original document, including Marcus's college fund. The digital reconnaissance phase was straightforward. Our family computer stored passwords in a shared browser, and my father used variations of the same simple password for most accounts. I verified my access to their online banking and tested the system with a small transfer between their checking and savings accounts. The transaction went through without triggering any special authorization requests. I spent several nights creating documentation of Marcus's misuse of educational funds, organizing evidence of the emotional and financial disparity that had defined our family dynamic. The file included photographs of his academic probation notices alongside receipts for his non-educational expenses. My moral deliberation was the most difficult phase. One evening at the bookstore after closing, I spoke with Harold hypothetically. "Have you ever been in a situation where justice and legality weren't perfectly aligned?" I asked as we shelved new arrivals. Harold considered this thoughtfully. Sometimes justice requires courage that conventional wisdom doesn't understand, he said finally. But the key is to act from integrity, not revenge. That's the difference between justice and vengeance. This conversation solidified my resolve. I calculated exactly what I had contributed to family finances through my work, unpaid labor maintaining their home, and the educational support they should have provided. The number was surprisingly close to the $50,000 in Marcus's college fund. I decided on a clear ethical line. I would redirect exactly what would have been fair for my education, not a penny more. Though tempted to take additional funds as interest on years of emotional debt, I refused to cross into territory that would make me like them. My preparations for independence accelerated. I secured a small apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire, close enough to transfer to the University of New Hampshire but far enough to create real distance from my family. I arranged a new job at the university bookstore through Harold's professional connection with the manager. I transferred my personal documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, to a safety deposit box at a local bank. I applied for transfer admission to UNH, using my excellent community college grades and the financial documentation I had prepared. In the final days, I created new bank accounts under my legal name at a different bank from my family's. I prepared detailed documentation of years of financial and emotional abuse, including testimony from Harold about my work ethic and character. I wrote separate letters to my parents, Marcus, and the few supportive family members like Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert. The most critical preparation was establishing the automatic investment structures for the redirected funds. I created a legitimate education investment fund in my name, with transparent tracking and documentation that would prove every dollar went to educational purposes. As the pieces fell into place, I experienced a strange calm. For the first time in my life, I was taking control of my narrative. The perpetual shadow I had lived in was about to lose its source of power. Timing was crucial to my plan. I selected a Friday when my parents would be attending their friend's anniversary dinner at an upscale restaurant 30 miles away. Marcus was documented on social media at a weekend-long fraternity event at a lake house several states away. The house would be empty, and both would be difficult to reach for several critical hours. I scheduled all bank transfers during normal business hours to avoid triggering fraud alerts. At exactly 2:15 p.m., I sat at my father's desk computer and logged into their banking portal using the credentials I had verified earlier. The familiar interface loaded, showing the various accounts, checking, savings, investment portfolios, and Marcus's dedicated education fund. The education account balance stood at $51,847.23. I initiated a transfer of exactly $50,000 to the new educational investment account I had established. The system prompted for verification, which I provided using the power of attorney documentation information. After a brief processing interval, the screen displayed, "Transfer complete." I then converted the funds into a legitimate education investment fund in my name, structured specifically for tuition, books, and educational expenses. The transfer documentation included reference to Marcus's academic probation status as justification for the redirection of educational funds to another family beneficiary. On each transaction, I included my electronic signature along with reference to the power of attorney document number. The entire process, designed to be traceable but legal, took less than 30 minutes. With the financial maneuvers complete, I turned to my physical departure. I had spent the previous week quietly sorting my possessions, donating what wasn't essential and packing important items in my car during early morning hours when no one would notice. All that remained were the few items in my room that would not trigger immediate awareness of my departure. I worked efficiently, loading my pre-rented car with the final boxes. My room looked nearly normal, bed made, desk organized, but emptied of anything truly personal. Standing in the doorway, I took a final look at the space that had been my prison and sanctuary for so many years. The walls that had absorbed so many silent tears now seemed to be releasing me. Downstairs, I placed 3 envelopes on the kitchen table, weighted with a small stone from Lake Winnipesaukee, a symbolic touch I couldn't resist. The largest envelope contained comprehensive documentation of my actions and their justification. The second held individual letters to my parents and Marcus. The third contained a separate note for Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert, including my future contact information. I had also prepared a contingency letter addressed to relevant authorities, containing evidence of Marcus's misuse of educational funds, to be mailed automatically if my parents attempted legal action against me. This letter remained in my safety deposit box, hopefully never to be needed. Standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, I experienced a surreal moment of clarity. The house that had never truly felt like home now seemed like a museum of emotional artifacts, each room a display case of memories I was choosing to leave behind. I walked to my car without looking back. The click of the door closing behind me sounded like the period at the end of a very long, difficult sentence. The drive to Manchester took just under an hour. Traffic was light, and I arrived at my new apartment building as evening shadows lengthened. The space was small but clean, 1 bedroom, basic furniture, walls undecorated except for a single framed photo of Harold and me at the bookstore's anniversary celebration. I unpacked only what I needed for the night: sheets for the bed, toiletries, a change of clothes. Standing in the kitchen, I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I ordered a pizza, my first meal as a truly independent person. While waiting for the delivery, I called Harold to confirm my safe arrival. "I did it," I said simply when he answered. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice though I had shared only vague outlines of my plan. "For the first time in years," I replied honestly. "Maybe ever." After we hung up, I stood at the apartment window overlooking a small courtyard. Darkness had fallen completely now, but unlike the oppressive shadows of my past, this darkness felt open, expansive. I would sleep without the weight of anxiety for the first time in years. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. My phone began buzzing with notifications around 10 p.m., approximately the time my parents would have returned home and found my letters. I had already changed my number, but my old phone remained active to document their reactions. The voicemails escalated quickly in tone. "Jason, this is your mother. Where are you? Call us immediately. Jason, your mother is very upset. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way. Come home now. Jason! You call me back right now. You have no idea what you've done. This is theft, pure and simple. We are calling the police if you don't return the money and come home immediately." The text messages from Marcus were even more volatile, filled with threats and expletives. His social media accounts exploded with rants about family betrayal and vague references to revenge. Friends commented with confusion, asking what had happened, but Marcus provided only enough information to paint himself as the victim of an unspecified injustice. Through Aunt Diane, I learned that my father had called an emergency family meeting at their house the day after my departure. The official purpose was to coordinate the search for Jason, but the actual focus quickly shifted to the financial situation once everyone arrived. "Your father was livid," Aunt Diane texted from a new number I'd given only to her and Uncle Robert. "He kept saying you'd stolen from the family, but when Uncle Robert asked exactly what had been taken, he got very evasive." My father's threats of police involvement disappeared quickly after a consultation with the family lawyer. According to Aunt Diane, the attorney reviewed my documentation and informed my parents that I had acted within the legal boundaries of the still valid power of attorney. Furthermore, my extensive record-keeping of Marcus's misuse of educational funds created potential embarrassment if the situation became public. The lawyer apparently told them that pursuing this might expose them to questions about financial impropriety. Aunt Diane reported. Richard was white as a sheet when they left the office. The extended family response revealed fault lines that had existed beneath the surface for years. Several relatives, including Uncle Robert, confronted my father about the years of obvious favoritism. Robert asked Richard point-blank if it was true they had no college fund for you while maintaining one for Marcus. Aunt Diane wrote. Your father couldn't answer him. My cousin Amanda, always perceptive, reached out through social media. I always saw how they treated you. For what it's worth, I think you did what you had to do. Stay strong. Most surprisingly, my grandmother, my father's mother, called a family meeting of her own 2 weeks after my departure. According to Aunt Diane, the usually diplomatic matriarch delivered a scathing assessment of my parents' failures. She told Nancy and Richard that they had failed not one but both of their sons. Aunt Diane reported. She said they crippled Marcus with privilege and drove you away with neglect. I've never seen her so angry. Meanwhile, Marcus faced the immediate consequences of his suddenly reduced circumstances. Without the tuition payment my parents had promised from his college fund, his university registration was placed on hold. The academic probation he was already under, combined with the missing payment, resulted in his dismissal from the program. The cascade effect continued when my parents, financially strained by recent expenditures on Marcus's car and apartment, refused to cover his rent. Within a month, he was forced to move back home and take a minimum wage job at a local gas station. Through social media and mutual connections, I learned that his humiliation was compounded by the contrasts with his previous boasting. Friends who had heard his stories of family wealth and privilege now witnessed his fall to basic employment and living with parents. My parents' reactions evolved in predictable patterns. My mother Nancy made several tearful attempts at reconciliation, leaving voicemails that shifted from anger to bargaining to emotional manipulation. We just want to understand, she pleaded in one message. We've always given you everything you needed. My father Richard's communications remained angry, then shifted to defeated as he realized the situation wouldn't be easily resolved. You've torn this family apart, he wrote in his final email. I hope you can live with that. What neither of them acknowledged was how their household began to show the strain of my absence. According to Aunt Diane, who visited regularly, small maintenance tasks I had always handled went undone. The yard grew unkempt, minor repairs accumulated, and the general order I had maintained gradually deteriorated. Your mother mentioned how much you apparently did around the house, Aunt Diane noted. I don't think they realized until you were gone. Meanwhile, my new life took shape with remarkable speed. My transfer to the University of New Hampshire was approved, and I began classes the following semester. The campus environment felt liberating after years of commuting to community college while living under my parents' roof. I formed genuine friendships with classmates who knew nothing of my family history and appreciated me for who I was rather than seeing me as Marcus's quiet brother. My apartment, initially Spartan, gradually acquired personal touches that reflected my tastes rather than family expectations. The most unexpected development was my relationship with Melissa, a literature major I met in an economics elective. Our connection began with debates over assigned readings and evolved into coffee discussions that stretched for hours. She was the first person outside of Harold who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and perspectives. You talk like someone who's been silent for years, she observed during one of our early conversations. Like you're still surprised when people actually listen. Academically, I thrived in the university environment. Professors recognized my analytical abilities and work ethic, providing opportunities I'd never encountered before. One economics professor invited me to assist with research for his upcoming book, an honor typically reserved for graduate students. The psychological transformation was perhaps the most profound aspect of this period. Through the university's counseling services, I began working with Dr. Landon, a therapist specializing in family trauma. What you're describing is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic, he explained during our sessions. Your parents created roles for both you and your brother that were equally damaging, just in different ways. Under his guidance, I began developing healthier boundaries in relationships and learning to accept praise and recognition without deflection or suspicion. The confidence I gained extended to decision-making in all areas of my life. The approach of the holiday season brought its own challenges and revelations. For the first time, I would not be participating in family traditions or obligations. The relief this realization brought was itself a powerful indicator of how toxic those experiences had been. Instead, I accepted an invitation to join Melissa's family for Thanksgiving. Witnessing their warm, respectful interactions, disagreements handled with humor rather than contempt, achievements celebrated without comparison, provided a stark contrast to my own family experience. "Is your family always like this?" I asked Melissa as we washed dishes after dinner. "Like what?" "So normal. So kind to each other." She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "This is just family," she said. "Isn't yours?" I didn't have the words to explain how different my understanding of family had been. But the experience planted a seed of possibility, that relationships could be nurturing rather than depleting, that love could be unconditional rather than performance-based. 1 year after my departure, I stood in my new apartment, a larger, brighter space I had moved into after completing my business degree with honors. The walls displayed framed photographs of genuine moments: Harold and me at my graduation, Melissa and I hiking Mount Washington, new friends celebrating birthdays and achievements. Not a single forced family portrait among them. My professional life had taken an unexpected but fulfilling turn. An internship with a financial literacy nonprofit had evolved into a job offer at their Boston office. The position allowed me to help others understand and navigate financial systems, knowledge that had been instrumental in my own liberation. Through Aunt Diane's regular updates, I learned of unexpected developments in the family I had left behind. Marcus, after his initial rage and self-pity, had settled into full-time work at a local business and enrolled in community college night classes. Without the safety net of parental bailouts, he had begun to develop the responsibility he had always lacked. My parents' marriage, long held together by their united front against outside scrutiny, showed signs of strain under financial pressures. My father took early retirement after his company downsized, while my mother increased her hours at the hospital administration office. The extended family, now aware of the previously hidden dynamics, treated my parents with a new wariness. Holiday gatherings continued, but the manufactured perfection my parents had always projected was replaced by a more subdued, honest atmosphere. Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert remained my connection to family news, though I asked them to share only general information rather than specific details that might pull me back into old patterns of concern and responsibility. "Your grandmother asks about you," Aunt Diane told me during one of our monthly phone calls. "She keeps your graduation photo on her mantle." The most unexpected development came on a crisp fall afternoon when I was visiting my old hometown to have lunch with Harold. As I walked toward the bookstore, I quite literally collided with Marcus outside a coffee shop on Main Street. We stared at each other in stunned silence. He looked different, thinner, less polished, but somehow more substantial. The practiced charm that had defined him was replaced by an uncertain authenticity. "Jason," he said finally, "I thought you moved away." "I did," I replied. "Just visiting." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with years of complicated history. "Do you want to get coffee?" he asked suddenly. "Just coffee." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat at a corner table, two strangers with shared DNA and little else in common. After several false starts and uncomfortable pauses, Marcus spoke with unexpected directness. "I was awful to you," he said, staring into his coffee. "All our lives, but especially at the lake that day. I've had a lot of time to think about it since everything changed." I remained silent, unwilling to make this easier for him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did now. Therapy helps," he added with a small, self-deprecating smile. It was the first honest conversation we had ever had. Though brief and uncomfortable, it represented a shift I had never anticipated, Marcus seeing me as a person rather than a prop in his narrative. 2 months later, I agreed to a carefully structured meeting with my parents at a restaurant halfway between our homes. Melissa accompanied me as support, her presence a physical reminder of the boundaries I had established. My mother cried when she saw me, reaching for an embrace I wasn't ready to give. My father looked older, the confident posture replaced by a slight stoop. We exchanged carefully neutral conversation about weather and current events before addressing the elephant in the room. "We didn't understand," my mother said tearfully. "We thought we were doing what was best for both of you. By creating a college fund for one son and nothing for the other?" I asked calmly. "Marcus needed more support," she began, falling back on the old explanation. "Nancy," my father interrupted, surprising me. That's not entirely true, and we know it." His acknowledgement, however stilted, was more than I had expected. "We made mistakes," he continued. "Serious ones. I'm not good at saying this, but I'm sorry." The apology felt both monumental and insufficient, a first step on a very long road neither of us was sure we wanted to travel. I accepted it with a nod but made no promises about future reconciliation. Regarding the financial resolution, I maintained absolute transparency. Every dollar of the redirected funds went exclusively to educational expenses, tuition, books, research materials, and essential living costs during my studies. I kept meticulous records and provided documentation to the family lawyer, demonstrating my ethical use of the resources. As a gesture of goodwill, I returned a small portion, $5,000, to my parents when I secured my first full-time position. The amount was symbolic rather than substantive, a closure rather than restitution. Most meaningfully, I established a small scholarship fund for students from emotionally abusive homes, using a percentage of my income. The first recipient would begin college the following fall, breaking their own cycle of family dysfunction through education. The emotional wisdom gained through this experience transformed every aspect of my life. I learned the critical difference between revenge and justice. Revenge seeks to inflict equal pain, while justice restores balance and creates opportunity for growth. My actions, while viewed by some as extreme, were ultimately about reclaiming what should have been mine rather than punishing those who had withheld it. I came to understand that family is defined by actions, not blood. Harold, who had provided guidance and support without obligation, was more family to me than those who shared my genetic code. Melissa and her parents, who welcomed me without reservation, demonstrated how healthy family systems operate. The importance of self-advocacy became central to my worldview. For years, I had silently accepted unfair treatment, believing that patience and accommodation would eventually be rewarded. The truth was simpler and harder. In this world, we must sometimes demand the respect and consideration we deserve. Perhaps most importantly, I recognized the power of chosen family versus biological ties. The network of friends, mentors, and loved ones I built in my new life provided a foundation of support my original family never could. These relationships, based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation, became my true inheritance. Looking toward the future, my plans included graduate school, using the remaining educational funds for an MBA focused on nonprofit management. Melissa and I discussed a future together that included new holiday traditions with chosen family rather than obligatory gatherings driven by guilt. My cautious, limited reintegration with biological family continued at a pace I controlled. I accepted occasional phone calls from my mother and sporadic emails from my father, maintaining firm boundaries that protected my hard-won independence. Most importantly, I committed to breaking the generational patterns of favoritism and emotional manipulation that had defined my childhood. If I ever became a parent, I would ensure each child received not just equal resources, but equal respect for their unique qualities and needs. The crisis that began with a lake and ended with liberation had led me to an authentic life and self-respect I could never have developed within the confines of my family's toxic dynamic. The brother who had been pushed into the water emerged not just surviving, but swimming confidently toward a shore of his own choosing. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to stand up for yourself against family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar challenges to find their own path to healing.